Should TCU feel disrespected? Should they be taking notes? Should they be taking a page out of MJ's notebook and be taking everything personally this offseason? We'll talk about all that and more next here on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're also available wherever it is you get your podcasts, so subscribe on the various podcast platforms as well. I'm Steven Simcox, your host. We're brought to you today by Gametime. Thank you for making Locked On Horned Frogs your first listen. Go to Gametime now. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Okay, so this evening, I recorded a Big 12 roundtable preview with some of the other Big 12 hosts and Locked On Big 12 host Drake Toll, who does a great job hosting that show, and you should check that show out as well. But it's always fun to get a little season preview going with the guys. And in all the years that I've done it, TCU kind of always falls in the same category. So the way they format it is they separate into three categories. So the first category was the contenders. They had Kansas, Oklahoma State, those hosts in that show. I don't think the Utah host could make it, but he would have been involved if not for a scheduling conflict. And then the next tier was what they called the dark horses. And it was myself representing TCU, Cam Stewart from Locked On Baylor, Kevin Borba from Locked On Buffs, the Colorado show, and then Mountaineer Paul, who has not launched his program yet, but he'll be the host of Locked On West Virginia this upcoming season. So good company there. I mean, all those guys are fun to be around. And it's hard to complain about the lack of preseason hype. I mean, the team kind of fell on their face last year. So by and large, TCU is not the type of brand that coming off a tough season is going to get a lot of attention. They're not getting talked about a ton in the national landscape. However, I hope that the coaching staff and the players are just sort of keeping in their mind some of the things that are being said about TCU this offseason. Now, I would love the Frogs to be a dark horse candidate for a Big 12 title. I think if they excel in that area, that means they're at least contending for Arlington, which would be a nice step forward for this program. But Sonny Dykes, in interviews this offseason, has taken a very humble approach, which you sort of expect that. And I guess in his defense, most of the questions have sort of steered him towards an answer of like the questions themselves are basically, hey, what happened last season, right? Like you had this really high and then everything came crashing down. You come back down to earth. What was the deal? What do you feel like the issues were? Have you identified them? Are you moving forward? And Sonny's been very transparent and saying, look, we didn't prepare super well. I gave the guys too much time off. We were behind in our offensive install. He gives all these reasons as to why the team struggled and didn't live up to expectations. And I think there's good practice in that. I also just feel like that's kind of Sonny's personality. He seems like, at least in those media settings, a pretty easygoing person that's just going to tell you the truth and be kind of a straight shooter. And, yeah, there's a lot to evaluate from this past season that they need to fix. They had to get better on defense. They addressed that by going and getting a new defense coordinator. They've got a quarterback coming back who in year two of an offensive system hopefully will take a step forward. They dipped into the transfer portal, and it seemed like their approach was, let's build a team around a QB that we think is competent, that can make plays, that can protect the football, that can do good things for us, and let's give him a good running game, a solid O-line, some weapons at the skill positions, and a defense that might not hold teams to 10 points week in and week out, but should be able to play more of a complementary style of football with the fast-paced offense that we want to run, create some big plays, some havoc, and have a bigger impact than the defense did this past season. And so all of that's positive. But by and large, I think the general thought around TCU at the moment is, well, a couple of years ago, that was kind of a fluky thing. They went on a great run. Last season was a mess. And I guess this year will kind of tell us what this team is under the Sonny Dykes regime, but there's not a high expectation for what they can do. And so I hope the team's confident and that they're taking notes in trying to prove people wrong this year. Because when you look at the Big 12, I think there's question marks about every team, honestly. I mean, Utah is a really good program. They've done a nice job through the years under Kyle Whittingham. They have a clear identity. They're going to be tough, physical, and play good defense. But Cam Rising is going to be playing football for the first time in like 600 some odd days, coming off a season-ending injury. I do feel like, even though Utah's not making a jump from like the group of five to the power five. I do think there's an adjustment period, though, when you're talking about playing all new teams that you don't have scouted as well, that you don't know the ins and outs of as well as you did the Pac-12 teams that you had played over the past decade. And there could be some bumpy roads and some growing pains there. Kansas State, again, same story, very consistent, really good program, great coach, clear identity. But the O-line, they're totally revamping what they're doing there. And, they lost some guys on the defensive side of the ball. They're going to have to prove that they have staying power this upcoming season. Oklahoma State, good football team. Kansas, good football team, but Jalen Daniels and his health, that's going to be a huge question mark. And then I really think, starting at 6, because Arizona was really good last year, and even though they have a new coach, I think they're a very talented group. But Iowa State, West Virginia, UCF, Texas Tech, TCU, Colorado, Baylor, BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, Arizona State, there's a ton of questions for all those teams. And I feel like TCU has as good of a chance as anyone else to step up and be a factor in the Big 12 championship race. And I hope the players believe that going into the season, and they're ready to make some noise and get people talking about TCU football in a positive way again. Now, to do that, you have to start the season off well. You've got some tough matchups with Stanford to start off the year, and then UCF and SMU in back-to-back weeks. I think that's going to tell you a lot about where this team is and what they can do and what their ceiling is. UCF and SMU are both going to be big tests for this new defense, understanding their assignments, being able to run with and cover explosive skill players, playing a good quarterback in KJ Jefferson, playing a quarterback in Preston Stone that's shown some flashes. And as much as I've poked fun at SMU over the past few weeks, and I'll continue to do that, they do have some talent on that roster. And that's always a game that they circle and they make a big deal about. I don't think it's going to be a super hostile environment in Dallas, but it's still on the road. It's not in the friendly confines of Fort Worth. And, that makes a difference. And those people dislike Sonny Dykes. And if there's a game on their schedule where they're really going to bring the juice, even in the new ACC where they're going to play some big-name teams, I still feel like TCU supersedes it all with the history there and with the rivalry that's been a part of that. And then if you can get through those first few weeks unscathed, there's some big matchups on the schedule after that where you're going to have to pull off a few upsets if you're going to be a factor in the Big 12 championship race. Whether that's Kansas on the road, Utah on the road, Oklahoma State and Arizona at home. Out of those 4 matchups, can you go 2-2? Can you beat Texas Tech and Baylor? Baylor you've had a ton of success with over the years. Tech you had a good success with until last season. Those are going to be the swing games that sort of determine where this team is and what they could do moving forward. Drake Toll also asked me in the course of this kind of roundtable discussion if I had a hot take for TCU football this upcoming year. And I didn't really have time to think about it because, I'm not complaining about this, but they didn't send us really prompts in advance. They were just kind of like, hey, this is what we're going to do. And so the first thing that came to mind was that Savion Williams was going to have a huge year and was going to be a day 1 or day 2 draft pick. And I think there's definitely a possibility that that happens. But if that happens, I feel like the bigger thing for TCU and the more positive outcome is it means that this offense is functioning at a high level. And as much as we've discussed the makeover that the defense needed to undergo to get more aggressive, to get more competitive, to make plays week in and week out, this is also an offense that needs to be more efficient in scoring territory. And maybe that's just as simple as getting better in the red zone. Another thing that could help is some explosive plays. So could Savion Williams be that guy, whether it's in the more traditional vertical passing game or in just dumping the ball off to him, getting the ball in his hands, and allowing him to go to work, getting yards after the catch, which is something he showed last year that he's really adept at. Either of those options is fine, but I feel like he will tell a big part of the story when it comes to the offense and their production this year. And Eric McAllister sort of falls in that boat too. We've talked about Dalen Wright. There's a lot of weapons with these skill players. I mean, it's easy to get caught up in just naming names. And I know once the season starts, there's only so many plays you're going to run on a given week. There's one football. And if it ends up being a shorter list of players but more targets for your key playmakers, I think that's fine. But you've got a couple guys on the outside that I've just mentioned. You've also got some good tight end play with Drake Dabney, Chase Curtis, an inside wide receiver like Jack Besh, some slot guys, J.P. Richardson, Jordan Bailey, Major Everhart, JoJo Earl. Well, JoJo Earl's been moved to the outside, but you get my point. There's a number of players on this roster that have the potential to be explosive and to be home run threats. And I think that's going to be a big key to unlocking what this team can do this upcoming season. So it was fun to talk to the Big 12 host. And I totally understand why TCU is considered a dark horse in the Big 12 conference for this upcoming year. And I know there's a lot of people in Horned Frog Nation right now. I don't know if that's a new phrase that I've coined. I've never really heard anybody say that, but that are sort of pessimistic or dispirited about the coaching staff based on what happened last year. And what happened last year was inexcusable. But this is still a head coach who's had success just about everywhere he's been and has won a playoff game. And you know what? That means something because there's nobody else in Big 12 that can say that. And I think they understand what it's going to take to win to high level. It's just about executing this year and, being a force in this league. That's going to be the real key for TCU this year and beyond. So check that out. I think it's going to air next week. But, yeah, I talked about being a dark horse candidate in the Big 12 and also hot takes and big games, big matchups this upcoming season. When we come back, is TCU going to do anything else with this 2025 class? We'll talk about it next on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. Gametime. Download the Gametime app today. If you need to find tickets on the secondary market, Gametime is the place to be. Major League Baseball's in full swing right now. Rangers trying to just kind of stay on the edge of this playoff race. Astros seem like they've kind of gotten their act together. If you want tickets to see either of those teams, you need to check out the Gametime app, and you should do it today. Again, that promo code, if you're watching on YouTube, I'll put it up here on the bottom of the screen. Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. A few features that I really love about the Gametime app. One is there's no hidden fees. Now, there's some fees. I've said this before. you're going to pay some fees, but they'll tell you exactly what they're going to be. And so that's really cool. Also, there's just the fact that they give you a view of your seat, or they tell you what your view is going to be from your seat on the app. So you click on it and you're like, okay, this is what I'm going to see at this sporting event, theater show, comedy show, whatever the case is, concert. Gametime can make it easy for you. $20 off your first purchase if you use the Locked On College as the promo code. Last minute ticket deals, flash sales. It's all available on the Gametime app. Check it out today. So TCU did a really nice job over the summer of adding some big name players to their 2025 recruiting class. Got Micah Strickland in late June, Chad Woodfork at the end of May, Adam Schobel at the end of July, Jared Martin, an edge rusher in the middle of June, Logan Schramm, lineman from Bernie in June, and there's a lot more. But bottom line is they landed a good mix of guys that project really well at the next level and are more blue chip players. Also, some guys that we would consider more projects maybe, but could be really good for them down the line. And at the moment, now, one thing that's sort of misleading about this, there's been an increase in scholarship numbers. So in the future, walk-ons aren't going to be a thing anymore. Basically, everyone playing on the college football roster will be on scholarship. And so you're going to have 105 players on your team that are all, getting their schooling covered. They've got 24 commits right now, which is a pretty large number. And when you look at the position breakdown, I mean, you got your quarterback in Adam Schobel. You're most likely not going to take another one. You've got 4 wide receivers, 4 offensive linemen, 7 defensive linemen. A couple of those guys are those new look stud linebacker / edge rusher players. 3 linebackers, 3 defensive backs. So where are you going to potentially add? I mean, I think you could see another offensive lineman or 2, just because that's a spot where you're always trying to stack numbers. You're always trying to get as many potential bodies as you can in that room. And if you're adding extra players, that's a position group where you can just always use the help. But it feels like this season for TCU football, when it comes to recruiting, is going to be more about retention than addition. You've got some big name players that you want to make sure you're keeping that relationship, open communication there, keeping things solid on that front. And I'll be curious to see how they attack official visit weekends, because you'll have, some big matchups this year where you want to have players in the stadium. And will they go more with current commits and just trying to make sure those guys feel valued and that they have a voice in this process and that, they're watching them and keeping an eye on them through their senior season? Or are they going to try to flip a few players here down the stretch? That'll be really intriguing to see. I think they've done a good job, especially on defense. Ken Wilson and Andy Avalos really hit the ground running when they joined the staff from the perspective of, hey, we got to get better athletes in here. We have to get players that can run sideline to sideline. That's going to be a huge key. We have to get players on the outside who can be edge rushers. And so they've done a nice job of identifying and finding the type of talent that they're going to need moving forward. Offensively, I think same thing. They've got some good skill players. They're still trying to bulk up on the O-line and get better there as well. All that's really positive for this upcoming year. So I don't feel like you're going to see a flurry of commits during the season. And maybe those official visit weekends where you have guys in for what hopefully is going to be a good environment on a Saturday night for a night game in the Carter, and then also some events through the weekend, it'll potentially be more about like, okay, let's make sure that we're staying in touch with all our current guys, because they're going to be getting recruited by other schools, and that we just have a good line of communication there, and that they know we're invested and we're still a huge key here. So I just want to take a moment to sort of set some expectations for that as we get ready for the season. And in general, we're going to hear less about recruiting, but I think especially for the way this class has played out so far, it feels like they've gotten most of the guys that they're going to go after. We'll come back and wrap things up with some of your reactions. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. So you can always chime in on the show in the YouTube comments, or you can tweet at me at SimcockSteven. Tanner McKinney says, and I was discussing yesterday, can TCU find their way in the top 25 by the end of the season? They're obviously not starting the season in the AP poll or in the coaches poll in the top 25, but can they find a way to claw themselves in there by the time the year wraps up with a solid winning year in the Big 12? Tanner McKinney says, I have a good feeling the season TCU will make a bowl. The defense is looking very strong. They need to score in the red zone. I bet TCU will take a top 25 spot for one of those teams. Yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful if you can win 8 or 9 games in this league, you should be ranked at the end of the year. And not that that's the end-all, be-all, but it would be a nice, proof of concept, obtainable accomplishment that you could point to and say, all right, we're heading in the right direction. We bounced back after a rough year. We're moving in the right place, and now we can really ramp up for that 2025 season where we're going to have a lot of experience, some transfers with multiple years of eligibility, potentially a quarterback in his second full year starting, really 2.5 years. All that would point to a team that would be ready to really make a leap and potentially be, a championship contender, at least in the conference and potentially beyond. But that starts with putting together a good season this year in building that momentum moving forward. Cole Rogers says, what's with the hate to the CW? They have large coverage and known brand comes on cable. SMU-TCU rivalry is important and should be played as long as both teams remain in the power conference. Yeah, I was having some fun with the CW yesterday. Yes, that is a channel that you can get over the air, right? Just with bunny ears. It comes with pretty much every cable package. I understand that. I also just think, Cole, the CW is not a network that many people associate with football or with sports in general. So you'll get TCU and SMU fans to tune in. I just don't feel like you're going to get a lot of casual fans because they're not going to know, where to find that ball game. And even though ESPN Plus is a streaming service, I feel like there's a lot more people scrolling through ESPN Plus on a Saturday afternoon just being like, hey, can I catch a football game? Oh, here's SMU and TCU. Let me check that out. But, we'll see. Remains to be seen for sure. Zoom Play says he thinks TCU is going to be in the top 10 when it's all said and done. Always love the positivity. I'm all for it. I'm not seeing that yet, but I hope I'm wrong. And, if they get off to a good start, I think the sky's the limit for this group. And then Todd said Haas Haney is much more suited for Bryle's run-pass option offense than Josh Hoover. Yeah, I think Haas is the future for sure. And his mobility and his ability with his speed to make big plays is going to be a huge factor under Kendall Browse. But right now, I just don't think he's going to be ready, to step into the starter to begin the season. So you got Josh, and I feel like there are things you can do with Josh in the passing game that can work really well. And it's just about finding those strengths and trying to put them out there as much as possible. We'll wrap up the week with Jamie Plunkett from Frogs Insider tomorrow. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team. We do it here every day.